All right, key phases. First phase, nuclear disarmament. All right, we are certainly familiar with this. The Acheson-Lilienthal report basically became the basis of the Baruch plan, and all of this basically argued that we should maintain our monopoly, but be willing to give it up if we could have the Russians open themselves up to such extensive inspections that we could know that they did not have nuclear weapons and would not get them. That was the trade-off that was being bargained. Next slide. I always like going back to this chart. I think I showed it once before. I think subconsciously, and maybe for other reasons as well that I haven't quite factored in, it is interesting to note that through 1947, we really were not trying to stack up a lot of nuclear weapons. And we were certainly in a position, if we wanted to give them up because we didn't have that many. It wasn't really until the Cold War started warming up with the fall of Poland, with the election in January 47, the establishment of communist government Czechoslovakia in 48, the creation of a communist government in Hungary in 49, and the loss of China and the establishment of the East German communist government in 49, that you can see the numbers start to go up, not just numerically, but geometrically. And arguably, by the time you get to 53 and beyond, it starts going exponential. Let's understand that there was some possibility being held out for, if you will, Robert Oppenheimer's dream, which was the scientist movement's dream, basically. Next. Well, this put an end to that. We went through this last time. Let's go to the next screen. So I don't want to repeat. NSC 68 panel of consultants. It was all about a point that actually was, I believe, raised in the Jeffries report in 46. It's a very funny fudge factor or sort of squiggly, squishy concept. Some of the time during the scientist movement's efforts under the Acheson-Lilienthal and Baruch plan, they talked about how only a few weapons could destroy civilization. As soon as you had a few, they would, attack, and then that would be that, 2 machine gunners in a room. However, in the Jeffries report, they said, well, you wouldn't really want to go to war to knock your adversary out until you had a significant number. And they put that number, I believe, at 144, and they had a formula for how many, areas you'd want to bomb and what your probabilities would be. That got picked up, obviously, in the NSC 68, and they pegged it at 200. By the time 36 more months went on, the panel of consultants said, well, 600. And then towards the end of maybe the decade, when we have our air defenses up, maybe 15,000. But the worry was the same, that now, well, we couldn't prevent countries from getting nuclear weapons, but we ought to make sure that they could not knock us out, which is to eliminate the mobilization base that we used in the Second World War to win against the Axis. As we explained, and went through last time when we talked about deterrence, this didn't quite get things right if the primary target set would be strategic air command bases. But that's what they thought. And they were very concerned about surprise attacks as well, for obvious reasons. It was all part of the same thing. Go to the next slide. Well, part of it was, well, let's reduce their ability to accumulate enough material to get an arsenal large enough to knock us out. And that was the Atoms for Peace proposal to, contribute jointly to a bank for peaceful purposes. And what was proposed in January of 57, which was the Fissile Material Cutoff Treaty, which was described explicitly by the administration as the logical projection and follow through of the Atoms for Peace proposal, because it too would prevent the accumulation of enough material to get that knockout stockpile, knockout blow stockpile. All right, but that wasn't all. Let's go to the next slide. There also, in July of 55, were some proposals that tracked, and in 58, that tracked what we were doing anyway. We were very concerned about surprise attack. We were flying U-2 planes over the Soviet Union. And in 58, we started to do satellites, work on satellites that could take pictures over their territory. To help establish that this was legitimate, we proposed to have agreements where we could continue to do this explicitly in a legal context by the Open Skies Agreement, which is something which, has become controversial and in the news because I think we just suspended it. And we would have freedom of space rules that everyone would agree to that would allow anyone to overfly anyone else to take pictures. So these proposals came forward, again, to prevent surprise knockout blow attacks. All right. These things were unilateral. They didn't get very far. The Open Skies Agreement eventually was agreed to. The value of the Open Skies Agreement, according to RAND analysts, was questionable and seemed like window dressing. It didn't seem terribly practical to them. But as a diplomatic cover for our activities, it actually, played a role. And the idea of freedom of space arguably was encapsulated in the START and SALT agreements, where national technical means of verification were agreed to as being legitimate, which was code for overflights of satellites to take pictures of one another's strategic arms. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Now, this is rather interesting. I always say planning is something you do, but it's always overrated, and sometimes you end up doing things not exactly as you planned. During the wind-up of the panel of consultants effort that was done in 1952, the Oppenheimer and the other members of the panel knew that there was going to be a thermonuclear test, the Ivy Mike shot, which, as you can see, not exactly a weapon, but an experiment that could explode. It used cryogenic fuels, which made it pretty impractical as a weapon, but tested the principles. So they knew this was coming. Oppenheimer was opposed to testing this before talking to the Soviets about a possible ban. And he was very upset, as was the panel, that the test went ahead in November over their suggestion that there be a moratorium to see if we could get an agreement not to even go down this route. Now, they lost that battle. But what brought nuclear test moratoriums and bans back into vogue was something that was not planned. In March, there was another thermonuclear test, and there was a very unlucky crew of fishermen on what was called the Lucky Dragon, who got hit with the fallout. You can see the yellow area in the map is where they were, and they were quite a distance from the actual test, and yet the radiological impact on their skin and on their health and well-being was disastrous. This prompted public demands for a test moratorium, at least in the atmosphere, and more. Let's go to the next slide. Now, making lemonade out of a lemon, the United States did a lot of testing, but then deduced that we were way ahead in the number of tests and the amount of data we had. And it was to our interest, therefore, to lock in that advantage by trying to get the Russians to agree to a moratorium. And indeed, it began in 58, and we finally did agree to at least a moratorium on atmospheric testing, which I think came in the very early 60s under the Kennedy administration. And the thought was that we had a superior ability to get data from underground tests. And so we would be able to maintain our advantage with this limit. This limit actually helped us maintain our ability to have massive retaliatory forces that were superior to Russia. All right, next slide. This one is a sleeper. Most people don't get what this is about, and nobody even bothers generally to include this in their history of arms control. This was the first bilateral arms control treaty with Russia. And you could say, well, who cares? It's an Antarctic treaty. I mean, good Lord. Most people don't remember it, though. Our biggest aircraft carriers could not get through the Panama Canal. They had to go around this strait. And demilitarizing Antarctica was pretty important to having safe passage to move our nuclear-capable aircraft carriers safely. We got that agreement. It helped us, all right? So it fits into a mode.